My name is Gertraud. I am the only survivor of the Braun family, which is Adolf Hitler's family-in-law.
Evil isn't always forged on battlefields. Sometimes it's quietly nurtured in living rooms, at dinner tables, behind locked doors. You know the monster the world remembers. But history kept a secret. The women who lived in Hitler's shadows. One was his niece. She tried to escape and died under strange circumstances. Another was his mistress. She followed him to the end and vanished from memory. And then there was the silent one. The woman who saw everything and spoke nothing until now. Behind the curtain of war, inside the walls of his private home, she saw the side of Hitler the world was never meant to see. And once you hear it, you'll never forget it. A haunting experience inside the Berghof. Few people alive today can say they saw the private side of Adolf Hitler. Fewer still were ever welcomed inside the Berghof, Hitler's luxurious retreat nestled in the Bavarian Alps.
Gertraud was not only Eva Braun's first cousin. Gertraud became Hitler's cousin by marriage, when Eva Braun officially married him.
But Gertraud Weisker, who was related to Eva Braun by marriage, was one of those rare individuals. Her experience, as she would later describe decades after the war, was not one of power or awe, but of deep discomfort, confusion, and fear. And what she witnessed behind those polished walls stayed hidden for over 60 years. In 1944, Gertraud received an invitation from her cousin, Eva Braun, to join her at the Berghof. Eva had grown increasingly lonely after her younger sister, Gretel Braun, married a man closely tied to Hitler's inner circle named Hermann Fegelein. With Gretel now preoccupied with her new life, Eva sought the company of someone familiar who could distract her from the growing horrors surrounding her. But when Gertraud stepped into the Berghof, what she saw was unlike anything she had ever expected. On the outside, the Berghof was a stunning and grand estate surrounded by snow-covered peaks and deep green forests. However, on the inside, it was a bizarre world frozen in time, where Hitler's closest companions dined, skied, swam, and danced, even as the world crumbled around them. The contrast was surreal. There was Germany, and cities were turning to ash. Yet, inside the Berghof, parties were being held regularly. Hitler's companions swam in the heated pool, while staff served champagne, and music floated down the halls. Gertraud later recalled how difficult it was to reconcile what she saw. There was a sharp disconnect between the luxury of the Berghof and the horrors unfolding just beyond its walls. But even more disturbing than the extravagance was the atmosphere. As she described it, there was something deeply disturbing and unsettling about being inside the Berghof. Everyone was careful. They watched what they said. There was no joy, and every laughter was forced. Everyone in the Berghof seemed guarded, as though they were constantly aware that one misstep could cost them everything. And at the center of it all was Adolf Hitler, who was quiet, commanding, and impossible to ignore. The sense of surveillance was subtle but ever-present, and no one forgot who was in charge. Gertraud later confessed that she was so deeply disturbed that she contemplated speaking about what she saw. However, her husband made her promise to stay silent because he feared the political and social consequences of being associated with Hitler's inner world. But when Gertraud finally spoke up, what she revealed was beyond chilling. In fact, in one rare interview, she said that this man touched my cousin is, for me, the worst. This wasn't just moral disgust. It was personal horror, because she had watched Eva and Hitler up close and had seen the extremely disturbing details firsthand. And yet, the parties continued, and the guests acted as if none of it was real. because to face the truth would have meant acknowledging the nightmare outside and the horror within. According to Gertrude, the Berghof was a haunted place, not in the sense of ghosts, but in the sense that something human had been lost inside its walls. The beauty was real, and the mountain views were stunning, but everything else was performative, controlled, and suffocating. When asked what stayed with her the most, Gertrude didn't speak of the luxury, or the famous guests, or even Hitler himself. She spoke of Eva, of the cousin she once knew, but had now changed. A woman playing hostess to one of history's darkest figures and trapped in a gilded prison of her own making. But Gertrude wasn't the first young woman to witness the darkness hidden behind Hitler's carefully managed image. Years earlier, another woman much closer to him had tried to break free from his control and had paid the ultimate price. Her name was Geli Raubal. She was Hitler's niece, and her story remains one of the most disturbing chapters in his private life. Hitler's obsession with Geli Raubal. Geli Raubal was the daughter of Hitler's half-sister, Angela Hitler, and from the very beginning, Geli was vibrant and charming, and this was a stark contrast to the dark and intense personality that surrounded her half-uncle. And what began as family ties quickly spiraled into something far more unsettling, marked by obsession, jealousy, and a tragic ending that would haunt Hitler's private life forever. Geli met Hitler when her mother, Angela, was invited to manage Hitler's household in Obersalzberg and later at his Munich apartment. She was just 17 years old when she moved into Hitler's Munich apartment, and from that very moment, her life changed dramatically. Publicly, Hitler referred to her as his favorite niece. However, privately, there was something eerie and disturbing about their relationship. In fact, they felt so close that they began drawing scrutiny, suspicion, and deep concern from those who knew them. Geli was young, energetic, and entering adulthood, but her world quickly narrowed under Hitler's supervision. Although she was initially enrolled at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich to study medicine, her interests soon shifted toward singing. She began voice lessons with aspirations of becoming a professional singer, an ambition Hitler was willing to support financially. But his support came with strict conditions. Hitler's control over Geli was absolute. He financed her singing lessons, but he forbade her from traveling alone. He controlled whom she saw and limited her ability to socialize freely. Even basic activities like shopping or attending concerts had to be approved in advance. Those closest to them noticed Hitler's obsession early on. Geli was rarely left unaccompanied. She was always under supervision. Her letters were reportedly monitored, visitors were discouraged, and her friends were scrutinized. In 1927, things reached a breaking point when Hitler discovered she was romantically involved with his personal chauffeur, Emil Maurice, one of the earliest members of the Nazi Party and a trusted aide. Hitler was furious, and he ended the relationship immediately and dismissed Maurice from his service. Despite their long-standing friendship, Hitler reportedly could not tolerate the idea of anyone else having access to Geli in a way he could not. By 1931, Geli's mood had noticeably shifted. Friends described her as increasingly withdrawn, anxious, and desperate for independence. She reportedly confided in others about feeling suffocated by Hitler's control. Her dream of pursuing music in Vienna remained strong, and she was said to be planning an escape from Munich to resume her lessons away from his reach. But she would never get the chance, because on the morning of September 18, 1931, 23-year-old Geli Raubal passed away in Hitler's Munich apartment under tragic circumstances. She had been alone in the apartment at the time of her death, following an intense argument with Hitler the night before. The official report ruled that there was nothing suspicious about her death, but the details were murky, and the case quickly became one of the most controversial moments in Hitler's early political career. No autopsy was ever performed, and there was no formal inquest. Instead, the death was closed quietly. But rumors spiraled. The Münchener Post, a newspaper known for its strong opposition to the Nazi Party, reported that Geli's nose appeared to be fractured, implying a possible physical altercation. This detail was later dismissed by authorities who claimed the flattening of her nose was caused by the position of her body after death. Still, doubts remained. Questions about Geli's final hours circulated across Germany. Some sources claimed she was pregnant at the time. Others suggested there had been an ongoing pattern of maltreatment. Otto Strasser, a political enemy of Hitler who had broken with the Nazi movement, publicly accused him of moral depravity and being involved in Geli's death. He alleged that the relationship between Hitler and Geli had been not only emotionally manipulative, but deeply inappropriate. Historians have approached these claims cautiously. While there is no hard evidence to prove or disprove an intimate relationship, and no documentation of an autopsy that could confirm any allegations of maltreatment or Geli being pregnant, many agree that the relationship was deeply unhealthy. British historian Sir Ian Kershaw, one of the most respected scholars on Hitler, concluded that Hitler had developed an intense, possibly pathological attachment to Geli. He described Hitler's behavior toward her as showing signs of an intense emotional attachment, possibly rooted in unresolved personal dependence, though not necessarily physical, but emotionally overwhelming. What is undeniable is that Hitler's control over Geli Raubal extended far beyond what could be explained by normal family bonds. She lived under constant surveillance, denied freedom of movement, and was emotionally dependent on a man who wielded both political power and psychological dominance. Geli's story was buried under layers of propaganda, silence, and fear. The Nazi Party moved quickly to downplay her death, insisting it was a personal tragedy with no political implications. But the public didn't forget. Whispers about Geli Raubal followed Hitler into the Chancellery and remained a footnote in his story, often overlooked, but never fully erased. Her life and death offer one of the clearest glimpses into the dangerous patterns of control that would later define the regime itself. A man who demanded total obedience from his nation once demanded it, just as fiercely, from a 23-year-old woman who only wanted to sing. And when that control slipped away, the result was tragic. But in the wake of her heartbreaking passing, Hitler reacted in a way no one saw coming. He would never face legal questions over Geli's death, but those who knew him said something in him changed after that moment. The man who emerged from that grief was harder, colder, and more detached. And what he did next, and how he carried her memory into the darkest years of the Third Reich, revealed just how deeply this loss marked him. Geli Raubal's tragic death had an extremely visible and lasting effect on Adolf Hitler. Those who were close to him during this period noted that he fell into what appeared to be a severe emotional and psychological decline. In the immediate aftermath, he suspended public appearances and withdrew from his usual political activities. Instead of attending her funeral in Vienna, Hitler left Munich and retreated to Tegernsee, a lakeside town in the Bavarian Alps. He remained there in seclusion, away from party officials and the public. When asked why he did not attend the funeral, he never gave any public explanation. But according to insider reports, individuals close to him at the time said he was inconsolable. However, 2 days after the funeral, Hitler visited Geli's grave privately. The visit was not publicized, and there are no surviving photographs or press accounts from the moment. According to later testimonies, he stood in silence by her grave and did not speak during the visit. In the years that followed, Hitler reportedly referred to Geli as the only woman he had ever truly loved. This remark was not made publicly, but it was reportedly said on multiple occasions in private conversations with close confidants. While the nature of his feelings toward her has been the subject of extensive historical analysis, what remains clear is that her death left a significant mark on his private life. Evidence of his attachment to her persisted well into his years of leadership, and at Haus Wachenfeld, his mountain home in Obersalzberg that would later become the Berghof, Geli's former bedroom was left unchanged. It was maintained as it had been during her life, with furnishings and personal items preserved. In fact, Hitler allowed no one to alter the room, and it became a private space that few were permitted to enter. In his private quarters, portraits of Geli were also displayed. A large framed photograph of her was placed on his desk, and busts created in her likeness were positioned throughout the residence. These were not merely decorative pieces, but were part of what historians have described as a personal memorial, maintained quietly but deliberately. Visitors to the Berghof, including high-ranking Nazi officials and personal guests, would have been aware of Geli's image, but discussion of her was rare. Her presence in the house, even after her death, remained silent and symbolic. Hitler's private staff also reportedly noted that he would sit in front of her portraits for long periods of time. While no written documentation from Hitler himself survives on this subject, multiple insiders from his inner circle confirmed his behavior during interviews and memoirs. Although he never spoke about Geli publicly or included her in official narratives of his life, she remained a significant presence in his private environment until his death in 1945. But Hitler's reaction and private memorial to Geli Raubal at the Berghof showed the world the kind of man he truly was. Rather than confront the circumstances surrounding her death or the rumors that followed, he preserved her memory in static form through images, spaces, and silence, leaving the rest of the world with endless questions and rumors. But as Hitler's devotion to Geli Raubal became locked in memory, another woman in his life entered a very different kind of relationship with him that was marked by secrecy, loneliness, and decades of isolation. The isolation of Eva Braun. Eva Braun, the woman who invited Gertraud into the Berghof, was just 17 years old when she met Adolf Hitler. At the time, she was working as an assistant and model for Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's personal photographer. Hoffmann had casually introduced the two of them after Hitler walked into the studio one day, but what would follow would be anything but casual. Eva reportedly told her friends that Hitler didn't leave much of an impression initially. He was over 20 years older than her and already deep in the world of politics. But over the next few months, he kept returning to the studio, bringing small gifts like chocolates, flowers, and little tokens. But as time went on, he also began sending her letters, making personal visits, and offering her invitations. By the early 1930s, Eva Braun was no longer just the assistant at the photo studio. She had become Hitler's mistress, though their relationship was kept almost entirely out of public view. Even within the Nazi inner circle, very few people were permitted to speak openly about her role in his life. She was not part of official events, and she didn't appear in press photos. However, she remained firmly in the background. That invisibility took its toll, and in 1932, Eva attempted to carry out a harmful plan in what many would later describe as a desperate attempt to get Hitler's attention. Although she survived that episode, a few years later she attempted another harmful plan, but survived. But while both events were described as cries for attention, they were reportedly triggered by how little time Hitler gave her and how little acknowledgement she received in his world. After the second incident, Hitler made more of an effort to keep her close. But that didn't mean she was suddenly part of his public life. In 1936, Eva moved into Hitler's private mountain residence, the Berghof, in Obersalzberg. To the outside world, she was just a guest. But in reality, she was now fully part of his personal life, however, not in an official way. She had her own room in the house, located near Hitler's, and over the years, she would spend more and more of her time there. But she was not permitted to participate in political discussions or attend key Nazi meetings. In fact, when foreign leaders visited the estate, she was reportedly kept out of sight. Life at the Berghof might have seemed glamorous from the outside. The home was large, with sweeping views of the Alps. There were daily meals served by staff, movie nights, evening walks, and long hours spent lounging on sun terraces. But for Eva, it was a kind of beautiful prison. She was often the only woman present.
She lived in a golden cage that wasn't even particularly golden. She was caged in, and it's perfectly natural to be unhappy in such a situation where you cannot express yourself.
Surrounded by men whose conversations revolved around war, ideology, and power. She didn't hold any influence amongst them, and she couldn't even give opinions. And so she waited and filled her time with hobbies like reading, photography, fashion, and swimming. She even recorded hours of home video footage, much of which survived the war. Those home movies were later found by Allied forces and showed a more human side of Hitler with videos of him smiling, walking in the garden, or sipping tea. But the tone of the footage was still strange and almost surreal. Eva appeared frequently in the videos. She smiled often, usually in stylish dresses or swimwear, posing beside Hitler or laughing with staff. But so many historians agree that those images didn't reflect her emotional reality. According to those who worked at the Berghof, Eva Braun lived a life defined by separation. She was reportedly separated from power, from public identity, and even from Hitler's full attention. He often left her alone for days while dealing with military matters, and he discouraged her from having many outside friends. She wasn't even a member of the Nazi Party, and she showed little interest in ideology or politics. In fact, many described her as an apolitical and emotionally dependent person who had built her life entirely around one person and had no path outside of him. Even in private, their relationship was carefully structured. Hitler was known to be distant and emotionally reserved. He had a strict daily routine, kept fixed meal times, and preferred long monologues to conversation. He and Eva had adjoining bedrooms, both at the Berghof and later in the underground Führerbunker in Berlin. Some reports claimed she often waited hours just to dine with him, and when guests were around, she was expected to entertain quietly and leave political topics alone. While the world saw Hitler as the most powerful man in Europe, Eva Braun remained invisible to the outside. Her name did not appear in newspapers, and she didn't travel with him publicly. No one was supposed to know that the leader of the Third Reich had a long-term partner, because Hitler reportedly believed that being unmarried made him appear more devoted to the German people and more appealing to female supporters. And so, as a result, Eva's existence was kept carefully guarded. But the secrecy only deepened her mental health struggles and feelings of isolation. She couldn't speak openly about her relationship, and this meant that she also couldn't build a life beyond it. And for all the luxury she lived in, she had very little personal freedom. Still, she stayed because she loved Hitler. But while Eva Braun kept up the appearance of happiness at the Berghof by smiling in photographs, relaxing on the terrace, and filming hours of home video, those who spent time with her privately saw a very different side. Gertraud Weisker, who had been invited to stay at the Berghof as a companion to Eva, later described her cousin as emotionally unstable and deeply obsessed with Hitler. She was cheerful one moment, moody the next, and always entirely focused on how much attention she received or didn't receive from Hitler. Her moods rose and fell depending on whether he was near, whether he had written to her, or whether she believed she was being ignored. What troubled Gertrude even more were some of Eva's personal behaviors that, for her, crossed boundaries of privacy and taste. She recalled an incident in which Eva and her sister Gretel filmed some inappropriate scenes while on holiday, and this was something Gertrude found very disturbing. In Gertrude's view, it reflected a deeper problem and a lack of emotional boundaries and a growing detachment from the world beyond Hitler. Despite being surrounded by wealth and safety, Gertrude began to feel that something was very wrong in the Berghof. While the war intensified and German cities fell, life at the Berghof carried on as if nothing outside the mountain villa existed. The staff remained quiet, and the guests stuck to small talk, while the mood remained artificial and tense. Gertrude, unlike many in the household, started seeking information elsewhere. At night, when it was safe to do so, she would secretly listen to British Broadcasting Corporation radio broadcasts. Foreign radio stations were banned in Nazi Germany, and listening to them was illegal. But Gertrude wanted to know the truth, and what she heard stunned her. The scale of the war, the reports of atrocities, and the direction things were heading didn't match the version of events being told at the Berghof, and it became clear that she was living inside a bubble of denial. Even as Germany's situation worsened, the routines in the Berghof stayed the same. Meals at set times, walks in the garden, and carefully staged leisure. Eva continued to live as if her position beside Hitler was secure. She ordered new clothes, posed for home movies, and spent long hours waiting for his attention. For Gertrude, it was difficult to watch. Her cousin wasn't just isolated, she was emotionally lost in a version of reality that no longer existed outside those walls. Years later, when asked about that time, Gertrude said the Berghof was unlike any place she had ever been. It was more than just a luxurious mountain retreat. It was a place where reality had been suspended, where people acted as though nothing outside mattered, and where one man's private world had become completely disconnected from the suffering he was causing across an entire continent. But the illusion couldn't last forever. As Allied forces closed in and the war reached its final days, Hitler and Eva retreated from the mountains to an underground bunker in Berlin. What happened in those final hours, just before the end, would shock the world and seal both of their fates forever. The Bunker Wedding. In April 1945, as Soviet forces closed in on Berlin, Eva Braun made a final decision. Despite being advised to stay at the Berghof or leave Germany altogether, she traveled to Berlin and joined Hitler inside the Führerbunker. Her arrival was against his direct orders, but she refused to be separated from him. On April 29, 1945, deep underground and surrounded by concrete walls, Eva and Hitler were married in a brief civil ceremony.
They mentioned for the first time that he had married and taken his life together with his wife. I got the impression that she somehow wanted to let her family know that she had married after all.
The wedding took place in the early hours of the morning, witnessed by two close aides, Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann. A state official was brought into the bunker to perform the ceremony. Eva initially tried to sign her name as Eva Braun, but then she struck out her last name and then corrected it to Eva Hitler, née Braun. The mood inside the bunker was quiet and tense. Outside, Berlin was being bombarded, and inside, the leadership of Nazi Germany was collapsing. Less than 40 hours later, on April 30th, 1945, both Eva and Hitler were dead in a final act of resistance. Their bodies were carried outside to the garden of the Reich Chancellery and cremated, as per Hitler's strict instructions. The remains were later found by Soviet troops. The wedding marked the end of their long, secretive relationship and the final act in a life of isolation, secrecy, and war. Gertrude Weisger's time at the Berghof left a lasting impression, not only on her but also on how future generations would understand Hitler's private world. Her story eventually inspired the novel Eva's Cousin by German author Sibylle Knaus, which drew directly from Gertrude's first-hand accounts. The novel offered a fictionalized glimpse into Eva Braun's life through the eyes of someone who had seen it up close. Meanwhile, the story of Geli Raubal, Hitler's half-niece, who died under suspicious circumstances in 1931, remains one of the most mysterious and disturbing parts of his personal life. And her death is still debated by historians. Was it an unsuspicious death, as officially claimed, or was she simply a tragic figure caught in a toxic relationship? Or perhaps Hitler's first private victim? Although no firm evidence has ever been found to fully answer these questions, the suspicions have never disappeared. Eva Braun's role in Hitler's life continues to generate discussion as well. She was never a member of the Nazi Party, and by all accounts, she stayed away from political matters. She didn't speak publicly, didn't attend meetings, and wasn't involved in the decisions of the regime. But she remained with Hitler through the war, right until the end, fully aware of who he was and what he had done. This left historians divided. Some wondered if she was a loyal companion, caught in a relationship she couldn't escape, or if she was an accomplice by choice who chose to look away. Neither Geli nor Eva ever got the chance to speak openly about the true nature of their relationships with Hitler. And so, much of what we know comes from the people who were close to them, and from the silence they left behind. Adolf Hitler's private life was filled with secrecy, emotional control, and disturbing personal relationships. Geli Raubal's tragic end and Eva Braun's long years of isolation reveal sides of his character not often discussed in history books, but deeply telling. They show a pattern not just of power over nations, but of power over people closest to him. Geli's death at 23 remains a mystery, wrapped in silence and suspicion. While Eva's life was spent in the shadows, kept far from the public eye, until she chose to die beside the man who had defined her existence. Gertrude's testimony is a chilling reminder that history doesn't just happen on the battlefield. It also happens in silence, in rooms no one sees, and in choices that leave lasting shadows. Do you think Adolf Hitler had a hand in Geli Raubal's death? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.